These are private roads, Mr. Hadley. Pay the $200 or the truck gets a boot. Lorraine Beckett said that to me at 7:40 on a Tuesday morning, standing at the end of my own driveway in a windbreaker with her arms crossed, while a kid from her compliance crew stood behind her, holding a wheel boot like a man holding a covered dish at a funeral. The $200 was for my truck. It's a 19-year-old work pickup with a toolbox in the bed, and my old business name still ghosted on the door where I'd peeled the vinyl off. And by the reckoning of the Thornbury Park Estates Architectural and Community Standards Committee, that made it a commercial vehicle. And commercial vehicles were not permitted on the private roads of Thornbury Park Estates. I didn't say anything. I took out my phone, turned it on, and let her finish. My name is Russ Hadley. I was 58 that year, and I spent 22 years working for the Vernon County Tax Office, assessment, then delinquency, which is the part where you send people the letters nobody wants. I've been retired 6 years. I keep my hand in with small tax investments, which is a polite way of saying I read the county's delinquent list every quarter the way other men read the obituaries, out of pure professional habit. Because when you spend 2 decades on one side of that counter, you never really stop looking. I had owned that road for 11 days. Not a share of it, not an interest in it. The road she was standing on, the pavement under her sneakers, plus the pool, the clubhouse, the tennis courts, and every square foot of open space in Thornbury Park Estates. Common Area A, Common Area B, and Common Area C, 3 parcels, sold at public auction to the only bidder who showed up, for a total of $8,400. And I let Lorraine Beckett stand on my property and threaten to boot my truck for 4 full minutes without saying a word about it. Because I have learned that when a person is that sure of themselves, the kindest thing you can do is get it on video. Here's how a homeowners association loses an entire subdivision. And I want to be clear that this is not exotic. It happens somewhere in this country every year. When a developer builds a place like Thornbury Park, the common areas, roads, pool, clubhouse, green space get deeded to the association, and the county assigns them their own tax parcels, separate from anybody's house. Small assessments. A few $100s a year each, because unbuildable common land isn't worth much on paper. Nobody thinks about them. The association's bookkeeping is supposed to think about them. For 11 years, nobody at Thornbury Park paid them. I found it the way I find everything, which is that on the first Friday of the quarter, I pull the county's delinquent tax list and read it with coffee. And in the March list, in the middle of 400 entries, were 3 legal descriptions I recognized on site because I'd driven past them for 6 years. Common Areas A, B, and C, Thornbury Park Estates. 11 years delinquent. Advertised for sale. Redemption period expired. I want to be honest about what I did next, because there's no nobility in it. I went to the auction. It was in the basement hearing room at the courthouse at 10 in the morning on a Thursday, published in the legal notices the way it always is, and I sat in a folding chair with 11 other people while the clerk read off the parcels. When she got to common areas A, B, and C of Thornbury Park Estates, nobody moved. Nobody bid. Nobody from the association was in the room. I raised my hand at the opening bid, which is the minimum, back taxes, penalties, interest, costs, and the clerk said, sold, and that was it. $8,400. 240 houses worth of roads, a swimming pool, and a clubhouse with a Keurig in it, and it took 40 seconds. The redemption window had already run. The deed recorded 14 months before Lorraine Beckett ever stood in my driveway with a wheel boot, and I'd filed a quiet title action to perfect it, because a tax deed is real, but it's got rough edges, and you clean them up in court. 14 months, and not one person in that association's leadership had noticed that the county had sold everything they owned. So I did the thing that I'd like on the record, since everything after it got ugly. 9 days after the sale, I put the deed in a folder, and I walked into the Thornbury Park Clubhouse at the monthly board meeting, and I asked to speak. I told them, plainly and without any drama, what had happened. I told them the common areas had been sold at tax auction, that I was the buyer, that I had paid $8,400, and that I had no interest in owning a swimming pool. And then I made them an offer I'd have honored that night. I'll deed all 3 parcels back to the association for exactly what I paid, plus my filing costs. Roughly $9,000. Let's just fix it. Lorraine Beckett called me a vulture. She said it into a microphone in front of 40 residents. She said the sale was obviously fraudulent, that no such thing could have happened without the board being informed, that I had engineered it, and that Thornbury Park would not be extorted by an opportunist. Artie Dunn, the treasurer, a big round man of about 62 who'd been on that board since the pavement was new, was louder than she was. He stood up and shouted that this was a scam, that the association's taxes were current, that he handled the books himself and would know, and that people like me were the reason this country was in the shape it was in. I said, all right. I left my card on the table. I went home. The next morning, I had a new citation on my door. $300, unauthorized vehicle storage, which is my truck in my driveway. And by the end of the week, the association had recorded a lien against my house for the accumulated fines, and a community update went out to 240 households explaining that a resident had attempted to defraud Thornbury Park by filing false property claims and that the board was pursuing all legal remedies. I want you to notice the arithmetic, because it's the whole story. On a Tuesday, I offered to give it all back for $9,000. On Wednesday, I was a criminal. Every fine after that raised the price, and they never once understood that they were the ones moving it. The next 6 weeks were the worst kind of war, which is the slow kind. They booted my truck twice. Compliance photographed my yard every morning, and the fines came every other day. Trash cans, a hose, my gutters. I stopped paying my dues, which is not a tantrum, it's a legal position. An association can't assess you for the maintenance and taxes of property it doesn't own. And I sent a formal records request for the audited financials, the tax escrow ledger, and every board minute for 11 years. Halston Community Services, the management company collecting a percentage to run the place, sent back a 2-line letter saying my request was not in the community's interest. Brad Nolan, their manager, had apparently gone 11 years without opening a single county envelope, which, for the money they were paid, strikes me as a genuine achievement. And this is where I have to tell you the thing that makes this story different from what everyone assumes. Because everyone assumes the same thing. Everyone thinks I put a gate up. I didn't. I couldn't. And I knew it the day I bid. My attorney, a dry woman named Camille Oduya, who does nothing but title work, sat me down before the auction and explained it in about 90 seconds. The declaration recorded when Thornbury Park was built grants every single lot a pertinent easement of access, use, and enjoyment over the common areas. Appurtenant means it belongs to the land, not the owner. It runs with each of those 240 deeds forever, and it survives a tax sale, because you cannot tax sell away a property right that belongs to somebody else's parcel. I owned the roads. I could not close them. I owned the pool. I could not lock it. I could not stop one single resident from driving home, or swimming, or renting the clubhouse for a birthday party. On paper, I was the least powerful landlord in Vernon County. The board didn't know that, and for 6 weeks, Lorraine Beckett ran that association on the terror that some morning the residents would wake up to a chain across the entrance, and she used that terror to raise money, harden the board, and paint me as the man about to take the pool from their grandchildren. I never once threatened it. I never had to. Their imagination did more work for me than a gate ever could have. What I actually had was quieter, and it came in the mail from Terry Gage, the board's attorney, in a letter that was meant to end me, and instead handed me the thread. Gage wrote that the tax sale was void because the association had never received proper notice of the delinquency or the auction, that the county's process had been defective, and that they would be moving to set the sale aside. I read that letter twice and laughed out loud in my kitchen. Defective notice. 22 years I worked in that office. I know exactly what that process looks like, because for 2 decades, I was the process. Every delinquency notice, every certified letter, every publication. The county does it by statute, and it papers the file like a lawyer with a nervous condition. And every certified letter comes back with a green card. A little green return receipt with a signature on it, scanned, dated, filed, and kept forever. So I drove to my old office and requested the mailing file on common areas A, B, and C. The clerk was somebody I'd trained. She had it for me in 20 minutes, and I sat in the parking lot of a building I'd worked in for 22 years and went through it page by page. Every notice had been sent. Every notice had been delivered to the association's address of record, the clubhouse, by certified mail. And every green card, going back 5 years, every single one, had been signed for. By Arthur Dunn. The same round, loud man who'd stood up in front of 40 residents and shouted that the association's taxes were current and that he handled the books himself and would know. He was right about one thing. He knew. He'd signed for the first delinquency notice. He'd signed for the second. He'd signed for the notice of tax lien and the notice of pending sale and the final notice before auction, and he had walked out to that mailbox and put his name on each one, and then sat down at a board meeting and said nothing for 5 years. The defective notice defense didn't just fail, it reversed. That file didn't show the county had made a mistake, it showed the county had done its job flawlessly, and that one man had absorbed every warning like a sponge. Because the notices weren't the story, the money was. I got the association's dues structure from a neighbor, because a neighbor will hand you a piece of paper that a management company won't. And there it was, on every monthly statement, sent to all 240 households for 11 years, an itemized line: common area maintenance and taxes. 11 years, 240 homes, a line item on a bill that every family in Thornbury Park paid every month without ever once looking at it. Because why would you? It's 4 words on a statement. The money for those taxes had been collected reliably, in full, from everybody, for over a decade. From young couples, from retirees, from people who called the office to make sure they weren't late. And it had never been sent to the county. Not $1 of it. The association hadn't forgotten to pay its taxes. The association had been billing its members for taxes it wasn't paying, and Artie Dunn had been signing for the receipts. That's when this stopped being about my truck. I brought the green cards and the statements to Camille, and she looked at them for a long time, and then she told me the thing that neither Lorraine Beckett, nor Terry Gage, nor anybody else in that clubhouse had thought about even once. And I'll give it to you the way she gave it to me, flat and quiet across a desk. "Russ," she said, "read their declaration. Article 2. What does the association exist to do?" I read it. It says the association is formed to own, hold, maintain, and administer the common areas of Thornbury Park Estates for the benefit of the members. "So it's formed to own the common areas," she said, "and it doesn't own any. Hasn't for 14 months. It has no assets. It has no property. Its entire stated purpose is gone." She let that sit. "Every dues assessment they've levied since your deed recorded is a charge for maintaining and paying taxes on property they do not own. Every fine they've issued has been issued under authority over land that isn't theirs. That lien on your house? They recorded it as the owner of nothing." The association was a ghost. It had died 14 months earlier, quietly, at 10 in the morning on a Thursday in a courthouse basement. And it had gone right on sending out invoices without noticing it was dead. Lorraine had been running an organization whose only reason to exist had been auctioned off for $8,400 while she was writing newsletters about mailbox standards. And there was one more thing, which came out later and which I think about more than the rest of it. 2 years before the sale, the county had called the clubhouse about the delinquency. Because they do that. They call. They hate selling property. Lorraine took that call herself. She had 2 years. She had a phone in her hand and a county employee on the other end telling her exactly what was about to happen. And there was an election that fall, and she chose the election. Word started moving through Thornbury Park the way it does, which is faster than any newsletter. I hadn't told anyone. Camille had filed the quiet title action, and quiet title actions are public, and a retired paralegal on Sycamore Court read the docket and made some calls. And by the third week, people who had crossed the street to avoid me were knocking on my door to ask if it was true. I told them yes and showed them the deed. Then I showed them their own monthly statement, and the line that said common area maintenance and taxes. And I watched about 9 different people do the same math in their heads in the same 4 seconds. Terry Gage withdrew as counsel that Friday. Lawyers can smell it. And Lorraine Beckett, God love her, could not stop. She came down my street one more time, and I was in the driveway with the hood up on the truck, and she planted herself at the end of it and said it again, one more time, on camera, because it was the only thing she had left. "These are private roads, Mr. Hadley." And this time, I answered her. I stood up and wiped my hands and said one word. Mine. She called me at 9:40 that night. The whole board wants to come talk. Tomorrow. Privately. They came to my kitchen at 7 the next evening. All 5 of them. No attorney, no minutes, no microphone, no folding chairs, no residents. Lorraine, Artie Dunn, and 3 board members who had spent 6 weeks signing citations they hadn't read. They sat around a table my wife's father built, and I made coffee because I wasn't raised in a barn. Lorraine had a speech. It lasted maybe 40 seconds before it fell apart, and then she got to it. The association would like to purchase the common areas. She said $50,000. I said no. Somebody said 75. Artie Dunn, who had not looked up from the table since he sat down, said 80, in a voice like a man in a hospital hallway. I let the number sit in the middle of the table, and then I said no to that one too, and the room went strange, because they'd come with the only tool they had left, and it hadn't worked, and now they didn't know what I was. So I told them what I wanted, one piece at a time. I put the tax deed on the table. Then the county mailing file, 5 years of green cards, fanned out like a hand of cards. Every one signed, A. Done. Nobody said a word. Artie made a sound. Then I put down a Thornbury Park monthly statement. Just an ordinary one, the kind that shows up in 240 mailboxes. And I turned it around so it faced Lorraine. And I put my finger on one line, and I left it there. I didn't say anything. I just let her read 4 words. Common area maintenance and taxes. I watched her read it about 6 times. And she understood, finally, that the thing that was going to end her was never me, and was never a gate across the entrance. It was a line on a bill her neighbors had been paying since 2014. Then I gave them the deal. I'll deed all 3 parcels to the residents of Thornbury Park. Not to the association is dead. To a new entity the homeowners form themselves. And the price is exactly what I paid. $8,400, plus the delinquent taxes I've carried since, plus Camille's filing fees. Not $1 of profit. Same offer I made you 9 days after the auction. The one that got me called a vulture. Still good. 2 conditions. First, every one of you signs a resignation from the Board of Directors of the Thornbury Park Estates Homeowners Association. Tonight, at this table, effective immediately. Second, the complete financial records of the association. Every ledger, every statement, every bank record for 11 years, go to the Vernon County Attorney's Office by Friday. You can walk them in yourselves, or I can walk them in with a cover letter. Your choice. Lorraine said something about being blackmailed. I told her that blackmail is when you demand something you're not entitled to. And I was demanding that a group of people who had lost an entire subdivision stop being in charge of it, which struck me as the mildest possible outcome available to anyone in this kitchen. They signed. All 5. At my table, with my pen, in about 11 minutes, because they had nothing. No property, no defense, no lawyer, and no story that survived a stack of green cards. Artie Dunn signed last, and he was crying. And I want to tell you that I felt sorry for him. But that would be a lie. He'd sat in that clubhouse for 5 years, signing for letters that told him exactly what was coming, while 240 families paid him for taxes he never sent. He wasn't crying because he'd hurt anybody. He was crying because it was Tuesday, and now it wasn't. The rest is bookkeeping. The county attorney's office opened an embezzlement investigation into 11 years of a tax escrow that collected and never dispersed. And Artie Dunn found out that a resignation letter and a criminal file have nothing to do with each other. The other 4 learned about breach of fiduciary duty, which is the part of the law explaining that "we didn't know" is not a defense when the not knowing was your entire job, and that a board that never once asked to see the tax receipts is personally on the hook for the money that went missing while they weren't asking. Halston was terminated for cause inside 3 weeks and got sued by the residents for 11 years of professional oversight they'd invoiced for and not performed. My lien and my fines died with the association that issued them, which was, my attorney noted, the most efficient dismissal she'd ever seen. The homeowners formed a new association in about 90 days, with a real audit, a real reserve study, and a treasurer who is a retired auditor and hates everyone. I deeded them common areas A, B, and C for $8,400 plus my costs, exactly as promised, and I have the closing statement in a drawer to prove it, because for 6 weeks I was the vulture of Thornbury Park, and I intend to have the receipt for that until I die. At the first meeting of the new association, somebody stood up and proposed a rule restricting commercial vehicles on the private roads. It failed. $8,400. That's an entire subdivision, every road, the pool, the clubhouse, and the reason that number is possible is a thing almost no homeowner knows exists. Common areas carry their own tax parcels, small ones, a few hundred a year. If nobody pays them, the county eventually auctions them to whoever bothers to show up on a Thursday morning. It happens somewhere every year. So before anything else, go ask your board for the tax receipts on your common areas. Not the budget line claiming they're paid, the receipts. Then read your declaration and find out what your association exists to own, because the day it stops owning that, it stops being anything at all. Now Lorraine. She didn't lose Thornbury Park at the auction. She lost it 2 years earlier, on a phone call she took herself, when she chose an election over the truth. Everything after, the boot, the fines, the vulture newsletter, was a woman guarding something she'd already thrown away. And notice who didn't beat her. Russ never gated a road, he legally couldn't, and knew it before he raised his hand. The terror they ran the association on was manufactured in their own heads. What ended them was paper. Green cards signed by their own treasurer, turning "we were never notified" into a confession, and 4 words their neighbors had paid for 11 years. He offered the whole thing back for $9,000, and they called him a criminal instead. So who really cost Thornbury Park its board? Him or them?